Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. We're continuing on our pandemic projects, and we're continuing to start these episodes by thanking all of our first responders who are out there on the front lines day in and day out trying to keep us safe and healthy during this terrible virus. And if you are a first responder, thank you for all you do. And if you know a first responder, please go ahead and thank them for their efforts in helping us overcome this terrible disease. Today we're going to work on a reel that Christopher sent in. It's a beautiful reel. It's a Penn 706Z. It's fairly rare. You don't see as many of these as you do the 700s or 704s and the like. It's definitely a saltwater reel. It's a large reel. It has a capacity, let's see if we can read the capacity on this, 250 yards of 25-pound test. So that's a large, heavy reel. And this one has the manual pickup in it. That's part of the way it came. That's not an aftermarket feature. That's built right into the rotor. They eliminate, on that, you eliminate the bail trip mechanism, you eliminate the bail spring, and of course you eliminate the bail. Less moving parts should result in fewer opportunities to break down. So we're going to take this one apart. We'll show you how to service it, what it's made out of if you haven't seen the 706Z or the 706, which was its predecessor. But we'll make sure we go through it. It's the typical Penn SpinFisher of the time. And if you're not familiar with that, and Christopher sent me in the whole box, which is nice. The original box had the breakdown of the pieces and parts in there, and the schematic is available online if you happen to have one of these and don't have the box or the original paperwork. The schematic online is available through mysticparts.com, which is the authorized Penn parts distributor here in the US. So let's get started then. We're going to take the spool off. We'll come back and service the drags on this in a little bit, but we're going to take the spool off for now. We'll access those drags by coming through and working on the top of the drag stack. You'll see underneath here there isn't any bail trip mechanisms or the like. There's only two holes in the bottom of the rotor. Those two holes serve to let the water out as you're cranking, and water penetrates through the groove of this cup. It's got to go somewhere, and those three holes there are basically drain holes for this reel. Okay, we're going to take the handle off next. This has a what's called a coffee grinder handle. It was made popular by the Garcia Mitchells of the time, and that handle is a nice grip before we've come to all of these ball bearing aftermarket grips. You'll notice that there's a thick washer that follows the handle and sits on the case to kind of provide some ease of use there. And you want to make sure as you're doing this, even if you have that schematic, you want to make sure that you note the sequence of the way that you're taking these pieces and parts off. And also, if you're reluctant or hesitant at all, or not confident in what you're doing here, then by all means take pictures. Now I'm taking pictures on a video camera here, but you can stop, you can use your cell phone, you can use a digital camera. Heck, I suppose you could even use a traditional film camera if you can find film for them these days. But the idea is at critical junctures, you want to take these pieces and parts, pictures, so that you know the sequence that you pulled them off and where they go and orientations and the like, just in case you get stuck on the way back in with the reassembly. So there's 3 case screws on this one, so we've just removed that. The internals of this reel are very clean. There's old grease in there. We'll make sure that we take care of that, and maybe some new grease there, we'll see. And you want to make sure that that anti-reverse, not the anti-reverse, ooh, we're off the channel there. That's an interesting one. We want to make sure that that dog is out of play, and it's out of play in the off position up. I suspect that maybe because I had the handle off, we just pushed that off. But we're going to go ahead and take this off. Best way to do that is to remove the screw that goes into the axle shaft below. And then we can take the axle shaft off by pulling up. And then we can remove the crosswind arm. And now we should be able to push the main gear out. The main gear's got a ball bearing on it, you'll note. And what we did here was we made sure that we had that dog in the off position. This is your anti-reverse dog. We wanted to make sure that's in the off position. And the reason that you do that is when you go back in to reinstall, if that dog is like this, you're having a hard time meshing with the teeth here, and you can knock that dog off of the stud. So just get it out of the way early on. Alright, that's the part there. Then we're going to come up top here, and this requires a socket because you can't get a wrench in. I believe it's a 14 millimeter or a ½ inch, but you'll see you can't get that wrench in there because of the angle. So go ahead and grab a socket, and that's the wrong socket, as is this. So I'm going to have to go ahead and just pause the video for a minute while I get the right socket. So we're back. This is a made in the USA reel, if we hadn't mentioned that before. The first production of the Z series came in the mid-70s. They replaced the straight up 700 series, the greenies, with the black and golds. This one was mid-70s, and the Z series went out of production in 2001. I think Penn has actually come back and reinstated 2 of the Z series reels, but for the most part they're out of production now. Okay, this reel was made in the USA. It was in the 70s. I actually found the 9/16 that fits. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove that. That's a counterclockwise, which is the traditional type of roll. There is no hold down screw. Sometimes you'll see that hold down screw in the rotor to prevent this nut from rotating, but that's not the case here. So we're going to take the nut off, and we should be able to remove the rotor. Then we're going to remove the 3 screws so that we can pull the shaft and the bearing there. So this is just a beautiful reel all around. Its quality has stood the test of time, and as folks like to say, they just don't make them like this anymore. Well, from an engineering standpoint and material standpoint, they certainly don't make them like this anymore. You got a brass collar here, you got stainless screws. It looks like a stainless shaft as well. And we should just be able to remove the shaft and the bearing, which we do. So we're just going to do a light cleanup on this. I kind of expected this when Chris said he was going to send me the reel. I think he really sent the reel for me just to do the video on it, because this reel is in good condition. But I'm going to grab a cotton swab here, make sure that we get all of that light grease there that's in the reel cleaned up. Now, if you had a dirty case with a lot of grease and grime and junk in here, you can go ahead and use a degreaser like a penetrating oil. You can go ahead and use some, what's the other one, this Purple Power and the like, a generalized industrial degreaser. In this case, this reel has been serviced recently, you can tell. It's been kept clean. So I think this is more just to go on record here to say that this is the type of reel that Penn made back in the 70s and why it's as popular as it was. That's a nice cut stainless steel pinion gear there. And we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to relube all of this and make sure that it gets ready to go fishing again. And I know Chris fishes down in the North Carolina area, and I'm sure he's waiting to get this one back to go take it out there and go fishing again. So we're gonna grease up the channels of the pinion gear. I'm going to give a nice drink of oil to the bearing. Do that on both sides. This is a shielded bearing, not a sealed bearing, so oil will get in there. We'll go ahead and load that to the top. And actually we can put a little bit of grease right onto the shaft where that bearing is going to sit there, just to give that inner ring a little lubrication to ride on, just like that. Alright, we'll come back in with this, and you can see I just put a little bit of grease onto the bottom of that where it's going through the bushing below as well. And you can see that I left the screws and the collar right on deck here, and I don't normally do that too frequently. But I knew I was just going to go right back in with this one. That's why they're sitting there. Otherwise, I would put them into my parts tray so that they don't get knocked around and I don't spend time off my bench looking for where those parts may have fallen to. All right, we have 3 of these. They're tapered screws. And those of you that watch my videos know this is my fun time of the projects. Just getting these screws going. Okay, after a brief pause, because nobody likes to watch me struggle with screws, just tightening down the last one. Give that a twirl just to make sure everything's working properly there. And then we're kind of reversing the process now. I'm going to grab that rotor and put that back on. You want to make sure you get your rotor through it, so it's a good idea to kind of hold the pinion gear. And you need to line the square part, or the flat-sided part of your pinion gear with the hold down. Go ahead and put the nut back on here. So to those of you that can be fishing now, congratulations. Some of the places have opened up fishing during the pandemic, and if you're out there, hopefully you've been able to watch some of these videos that we've done here and tune up your reel. If you have a reel that needs tune-up and you don't have the video and you don't quite know what you're getting yourself into, then by all means shoot me a note. If I happen to have one in the shop, I'll try and do a video to show you how to do that. And if I don't have one in the shop, I will put it on a list of requests, and when one does come in, if one does come in, they don't all come in, but if one comes in, I will certainly make a point of doing that video to show you how to do that. As many of you know as well, I do repair the reels, so if you are interested, I do have a mail order service, and you can contact me through the information at the end of the channel here. So again, shielded. This one you can actually take the shield off of. I did a video on this one a while ago, how to service shielded ball bearings, but you can see that there's a ring here, the inner ring that holds this bearing in place. You can remove that ring, much like the ring on a spool for a drag service. You can pull the shield off, and you can re-grease if you want. There's also some commercial products out there that you can force grease into these bearings if you want to do that. Okay, so this has been cleaned, it's been lubed, it's been oiled. I'm going to go over to the main gear now. Again, a beautifully cut, I believe this is still bronze at that point, beautifully cut stainless center. Just a nice example of the way this reel was made. We're going to check the teeth on this. We'll make sure that there's no chipped or warped or bent teeth. Do the same thing with the anti-reverse teeth as well. I'm going to put a little bit of grease onto the main shaft, get grease into the teeth on the main gear. You don't have to grease the teeth on the click ratchet. That's going to be where the anti-reverse dog is going to land. That doesn't need grease. And then when we put this back in, you see that there's grease on here for that cross-wind arm to travel. We'll make sure that we put some grease on that after we reload. Okay, we're going to reload this in now. That's simply pushing it in. And again, we have the anti-reverse dog off so that it goes in easily. And we'll give it a spin just to see that it's working very nicely. I like to do this with the handle on. Yep, wrong bucket. I keep 2 trays. I generally keep a tray for the exterior parts and a tray for the interior parts, just to keep myself honest. And I like to put the handle on at this point, because that way the main gear won't fall out. It'll be stable as we work on the rest of the reel here. Okay, so we've got that stabilized. Now we want to grab our axle shaft. You want to make sure that's clean. If this was rough and it's not, take some steel wool, run it up and down just to get any debris or that might be clear on it. And then just kind of move it around. I'm going to put a light coating of oil on this. You don't want too much grease, not oil. Grease, just kind of get the excess off of it, because when you go to insert it through the pinion gear, Any excess is just going to clog up top, and eventually it'll dry and it'll deteriorate performance. Okay, so now our axle shaft goes in. Again, it's got pretty tight tolerances there. You'll notice we have the hole for the crosswind arm, and we have the crosswind itself. I'm going to do the same thing here. We'll just clear off the old grease. And again, this reel is in very nice condition. I've seen a lot of these come in totally salted out, sanded, and dried greased in that. That's not the case with this one at all. Alright, I'm just putting grease onto the back of it where it's going to travel on your main gear. I'm going to just, now I mentioned before, we're going to make sure we get some grease onto the main gear as well. I'll turn this to get it to the right orientation. We can insert now. You want to make sure that your crosswind arm is over that stud with the collar. You want to make sure that the hole for the crosswind arm tie down is lined up. If you're having any difficulty, get a pin to just line that up properly. And we can grab that and put that piece back in. Here's a small screw I don't have a problem with because it's got a little insert where the groove in the arm is holding it. You can give that a crank just to see how that works, and it's, again, a beautiful reel all around. You can go ahead and put the side plate back on. Now, when I was taking this side plate off, I made a note here that all three side plate screws were the same. Sometimes they're not, so you want to make sure as you're taking this apart, any reel apart, that you check the side plate screws. Sometimes one is longer, or it has a different diameter thread, or it has a different head on it or whatever, and there's a reason why the manufacturers do that. It just usually has to do with clearance internally, so just make sure you're putting the right ones in the right positions if the screws are not the same. And again, in this case, the screws are all the same, so it's not a worry. And we'll just come up here. So I've had a lot of SpinFishers in lately, interestingly enough. And we'll do this one, we'll post a video. I had the SpinFisher 5 series, 7500. That one will be posted shortly if I haven't posted it already. And I've also had the SpinFisher 712Z. I think we put that one in on the other day. And I have a 5500 that I did recently. So there's been a lot of SpinFishers in for whatever reason. Okay, here's your internals of the spool. There's nothing going on underneath. You can put a drip of oil or two onto that little click ratchet. That click ratchet is going to ride on this sawtooth click rotor here. That's going to tell you that the spool is reversing, and when it reverses, it's telling you that the line's going out from the drag, so just kind of alerting you that a fish is on. Alright, there's a C clip here. I'm going to use my pick, and you'll notice that there's a series of little indentations here. Just slide the pick into one of those indentations so that you can grab that ring. And then with a little bit of pressure out, you can pull that ring up. Now that ring has got a certain spring characteristic to it, so hold your finger over it as you're taking it out so it doesn't shoot. Alright, once that's out then, we have a series of drag washers in here, and this is just as I would have expected. The drag washers are in good condition, and you can just tell that kind of by the internals of the reel itself. Okay, we're laying out our drag washers in front of us. Now's a good time to go to the schematic because I noticed that there's a plastic washer in there. And the plastic washer says that you have a 704 washer, a 57A washer, and 260. So the plastic washer is the first washer in, and we had a hectagonal piece to close this channel. Before we want to get too far into reinstalling, I noticed that there is a little bit of dirt in here, and that makes total sense because the top of a top-loaded drag reel is going to be the one that's going to take all of the beating. So when you're reeling in line, all the salt water and anything else is going to be hitting off that adjuster button. Some of it seeps in there and that becomes problematic. All right, First one up then was this hectagonal bottom. Then we had our plastic one came in, or Teflon one. You don't do anything with a Teflon. Then we had the next step being the HT100. I'm going to put some Cal's Universal Grease on that one. We're going to put a round washer in next, and we just used the Cal's Universal Grease. I put some on there. I rubbed it around with my hand to spread it evenly. Place that in. I'm going to put the second hex washer in. So the hex washers hold the spool. The round washers hold the shaft. You'll notice on the hex washers you have a round circle there, so there's nothing going to grab the shaft. But those flat sides on that do hold the spool tension. This holds the shaft tension because it conforms to the shape of the shaft. And when you put pressure on both, you're holding the spool and the shaft, and that's kind of how the drag washer setup works. All right, last one of those with the Cal's grease. Last of the round washers. I'm just going to try and align this one a little bit better so that it goes on easier. I'm just looking at how we'll join the shaft. And then we come back with the circular clip. There's a groove that this rides in. Again, just like we did before, hold that spring. You don't want it to shoot if you somehow get it caught and bound up. And then you just get it into the groove just like that. Up top then with the spool. One more piece here, which is the drag adjuster knob. And this reel's ready to go fishing. I don't think we have the washers on the post quite right. There we go. That should be better. So that last rectangular one wasn't on quite the way it should have been. All seated now. There you go. All the way down, no movement. Then back it off. If you're just storing your reel, back the drags off. You don't need to press them down. They're only going to kind of weld themselves over time. Look at that. 1706Z, ready to go fishing again. Beautiful reel. The handle is loose here. Not a problem. Beautiful reel, ready to go fishing again. Christopher, thank you for sending this one in. Just a lot of fun to work on. Okay, we're going to just make sure that our anti-reverse is working, which it is. That's it. That's the Penn SpinFisher 706Z with the manual bail pickup. So just a quick tip as we conclude this thing. If you're casting any reel, but in particular a manual bail reel, bring the spool all the way up. That way when you're throwing line out, it's never going to bounce off of the rotor. When you're doing the manual bail pickup, you want to start in this position. You'll have your hand right over where the line is, and you can grab it with your forefinger as you do your casting. And then Penn recommends that you drop, as you're holding the line, you drop your handle down to the bottom so that nothing hits with the handle as you cast. And then simply as the spool runs out, as your lure hits the water, as the sinker hits the bottom or whatever, then you just go back in, grab your line with your finger, wrap it around the bottom, and that's how the manual bail works. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, if you're a first responder, thank you for all you do. Thank you for trying to keep us all safe. If you're part of the general population like myself and everybody else in the world today, please stay safe. Wear the mask. Wash your hands. Take precautions. It's simple things that can help us get through and help us to stay safe and healthy. So with that, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.